By the third day, the blocks had torn his hands open. That morning, a black car had pulled up beside the site. 3 men stepped out, former classmates. They looked across the fence at the workers, and their eyes moved past John like he was part of the dust. They did not recognize him. He turned and kept walking. The concrete took skin the way it takes everything. Gradually, then all at once. Not the first day. The first day, his palms just burned. By the third day, the block edges had found the soft place below his knuckles and opened it. He wrapped his hand with a strip torn from an old singlet and kept working. The foreman saw it, handed him a pair of worn gloves without a word. John put them on and went back to the pile. This was Bariga. 7 in the morning. Already felt like punishment. He had been on this site 2 weeks. Before this, 11 months of applications. Before that, graduation. Computer Science and Engineering, University of Lagos. His mother, Ada, had borrowed from 3 different people to keep him enrolled. She kept the certificate in a plastic sleeve inside her Bible like it was scripture. John had stopped looking at it. It was not a crown, not a key. It was a piece of paper that had failed to open a single door. Every time he saw it, he felt a specific anger, not at the world, at himself for believing it would be enough. He had believed that completely, and that was the part that stayed with him on the site, not the rejections, the belief that had made the rejections so disorienting. The car that morning had belonged to Chitty. John had seen it from across the site before he saw the faces. Long, black, unhurried. The kind of car that moves slowly because it can. 3 doors opened. Chitty in a light blue kaftan. Rex on his phone before his feet touched the ground. Tade standing with his hands in his pockets, looking at the site the way people look at construction they have no connection to. John stopped moving. He watched Chitty scan the workers near the fence. Watched his eyes travel across the site. Watched them land on John. And keep moving. No pause. No flicker. John's face was gray with dust. His shirt was unrecognizable. His shoulders carried the forward pull of a man who had been lifting since dawn. Chitty looked directly at him and saw a laborer. Not John. Not his name. Not 3 years of shared lecture halls and examination rooms. Not the graduation night, when Chitty had said loudly that John was going to be the one they all called when things got serious. Just a worker covered in dust, indistinguishable from the others. John turned and walked back to the pile. Babatund, the older man who had spent the first week quietly showing him how to carry without destroying his spine, fell in alongside him without speaking. He had been watching. He said nothing. He tapped John once on the arm and kept moving. It was the most useful thing anyone had done for John in months. At the fence, Chitty was asking one of the workers near the gate whether the road to the island was clear. The worker said he did not know. Chitty nodded, said something to Rex, and they got back in the car. The engine sound faded down the road. John set his block down at the drop point and stood there a moment, his back to where the car had been. His hands were bleeding again through the wrap. His mouth tasted like concrete dust. He had not eaten since the previous afternoon. He thought about his mother's Bible, the plastic sleeve inside it. Then he went back for another block. The cyber cafe was on a narrow street off Bariga Main Road. 200 naira an hour. He went on Saturdays after the site paid him, when the queue was shorter and the worst of the heat had passed. The keyboards were sticky. 3 of the monitors flickered every 40 seconds, like a small warning that kept arriving and being ignored. The man in the corner was either watching football or downloading things that loaded slowly. John sat down and worked. He had found an open source project on GitHub 2 months into the site work. A developer tool with a quiet but active community. 14 unresolved bug reports sitting untouched. The kind nobody wanted because they required patience rather than brilliance. He took the smallest one first. It took him 3 Saturdays. Not because the problem was complex. Because the framework had moved 2 versions forward while he was printing resumes on clean paper and walking through office doors that led nowhere. He had to relearn things he thought he already knew. That humiliation, sitting in a plastic chair under a flickering screen, realizing his knowledge had an expiry date, was different from the rejection letters. Quieter, more personal. He submitted the fix. He checked the thread the next morning from his phone, before the site started. Then, the morning after that. He checked it, the way you check something when the outcome matters more than you want to admit. On the fourth day, a maintainer reviewed it and merged it. No money. One line in a commit log with his username attached. He sat with his phone in the site changing room for a moment, before the foreman called the morning start. Then he put the phone away and went to carry blocks. He took the next bug report that same Saturday. By the sixth fix, a developer in the thread asked who he was. John answered plainly, said he was a contributor, catching up on time he had lost. The developer said the fixes were clean, said if John ever wanted small paid contracts, to send a message. He sent the message that night. The first contract paid 8,000 naira. It took him 2 full weekends and most of his evenings for 2 weeks, working from his phone after cafe hours, cross-referencing documentation on a screen small enough to cause headaches. The client wanted a simple automation script. John built it, tested it 3 times, and delivered it. He sat with the payment notification longer than he planned. 8,000 naira. Less than 2 days of what the site paid him for lifting. He sent 4,000 to his mother without explaining where it came from. She sent back a voice note that was mostly her praying. He listened to it twice on his way to the site the next morning. He took the next contract before the first one had fully closed. His skills were not back. They were forward from where they had been, which was different. The frameworks he had missed, he learned in pieces. The tools that had become industry standard after his graduation. He encountered them the way a person encounters a city they have heard about but never visited. He made errors a recent graduate would not have made. He fixed them without ceremony and kept moving. The fourth contract was 50,000 naira. A small logistics startup needed their internal tracking system rebuilt from scratch. The founder, a direct woman named Temi, had found him through the open source thread. She asked for a video call. He told her he could not guarantee the connection for video. She said voice was fine. 20 minutes later, she gave him the project. He delivered in 3 weeks. She sent the payment, then a message. She said the system was cleaner than what her previous developer had built for 3 times the price. She said she would send his name to people. He read that message in the cafe. The monitor doing its 40-second flicker. Football sounds drifting from the corner. He waited out the full hour he had paid for. Then he went home and slept longer than he had in months. He left the construction site 8 months after he arrived. The foreman shook his hand. Baba Tund gave him the nod. The specific nod of a man who has watched something prove itself over time and has no further comment to make. John walked out on a Thursday afternoon with his things in a bag and no ceremony. Temi's startup had offered him a part-time contract. Not enough to call it a job. Enough to stop carrying blocks. He moved to a slightly better room. Still small, but the walls were dry. He was 3 years behind when he walked into his first proper tech role. And he knew it in the specific way you know something you cannot say out loud at work. His colleagues were current in ways he was not. Frameworks they used casually. He was learning in his own time in the evenings. Tools that had become standard while he was in a room with mold on the walls. He encountered them for the first time in professional settings and had to manage his face while he figured them out. He stayed late, not visibly, not in the way that performs dedication. He stayed because he genuinely needed the hours. And there was no version of this that did not require them. His team lead was a woman named Simi. Precise, economical with words. She noticed him in his second week. Not the hours, the questions. The specific kind of questions that come from someone rebuilding rather than learning fresh. She pulled him into a brief hallway conversation and asked plainly where he had been before this role. He told her all of it. The applications, the site in Bariga, the café on Bariga Main Road, the first 8,000 naira contract. He said it without shaping it into a story, just the sequence of what happened. Simi looked at him for a moment. Then she said she had one rule for her team. Nobody pretended to know what they did not know. She said it protected everyone. He said he understood. She went back to her desk. That was the whole conversation. But from that week, when he came to her with a gap, she answered it without making it a moment. That alone was worth more than the salary for the first few months. He made serious mistakes. A deployment error in his 4th month caused a 4-hour system outage. He sat with Simi and walked through every decision that had led to it. She did not soften it. He did not want her to. He documented the failure himself, identified the gap, fixed the process, and moved on. It did not happen again. By the end of his first year, he was leading 2 junior developers. By his second, he was heading the infrastructure team. He did not talk about the construction site at work. Not because it was a wound, because it did not fit anywhere in the normal flow of conversation. His colleagues complained about difficult quarters, difficult managers, the grinding weight of ambition. He listened, and he meant it. But there was a room inside his experience that had no equivalent in theirs. And he had stopped trying to build a door into it. The news about Chitty came through the usual Lagos network. 3 years after the site, the import business had collapsed under debt. Rex was in a dispute with a partner over money that had been mismanaged for longer than anyone admitted. Tade was working, stable, just not moving. John heard this in passing, a mutual contact, a conversation that was not even about them specifically. He had imagined this moment in a vague way over the years. The news arriving, the evening he would sit with it. He had expected something to settle in him when it came, some quiet, private accounting. Instead, he was in the middle of a technical review. He registered the information the way you register a sound outside that turns out to be nothing urgent. He noted it, went back to the document. 5 years after Bariga, John sat in a meeting room with glass walls overlooking Lagos Island. 8 people around a table. An acquisition in Port Harcourt. His job was to assess the technical infrastructure of the target company and determine integration cost and timeline. He had prepared for 3 days. He spoke for 11 minutes. Questions came from around the table. He answered each one. When the managing director, a measured woman named Dr. Olu, pushed back on one of his risk assessments, he engaged it point by point until she nodded and moved on. After the room cleared, she stopped him in the corridor, asked how long he had been in infrastructure. He told her the number. She said she had been trying to fill a senior role for 7 months. Said most candidates understood the technical side or the commercial side. Said she had not met many who held both. He told her to send him the details. He took the role 6 weeks later. His new office had a window that caught the morning light before the floor got busy. He arrived early most days before the noise started. 3 months into the role, he was reviewing overnight system logs when he looked down at his hands on the keyboard. The scars were still there, below the knuckles on both hands. The place where the block edges had found skin and opened it day after day until the body gave up healing it cleanly and built something tougher over the top. They had faded. Most people would not notice. Just slightly different texture. Thicker. The body's quiet record of what it had absorbed. He looked at his colleagues through the glass wall. Good people. Sharp. Clean hands, all of them. Hands that had moved from classroom to keyboard to conference room without interruption. They were building things. Real things. He respected that completely. But there was a distance between his experience and theirs that had no obvious bridge. Not because of resentment. Because some things do not translate. The specific weight of a hollow concrete block at 7 in the morning, when you have not eaten. The 200 naira café on a Saturday with a flickering monitor and the first 8,000 naira payment sitting in your phone, like proof that something was still possible. The way Babatun's single tap on the arm had held more care than most things said to him in full sentences that entire year. These things had made him, slowly, without drama, without a single moment, where everything changed at once. Chitty had looked directly at him at that fence and seen nothing worth remembering. He had not been wrong about what he saw. He just had no way of knowing what that dusty laborer was building quietly in a cramped café every Saturday. What he was becoming, not because the world relented, because John refused to stop moving inside it. Now John ran systems that Chitty would not know how to enter, not because John was exceptional, because he had kept going through the years, when keeping going produced nothing visible. And that kind of endurance does not sit still. It builds. It compounds. It moves forward every single day, whether anyone is watching or not. And by the time the people who laughed finally look up to find you, you are already so far ahead that catching up is no longer a reasonable conversation. He looked at his hands one moment longer. Then the first email of the morning arrived, and he started the day